Yeah, and I've seen this play out in real life where, so we'll do an active shooter drill, and I know you've done this hundreds and hundreds of times, but it's all about the active shooter, and then it's like, okay, how did everybody do? Like, and we do it in real time. Like, and so,
Right. No, that's good.
yeah, I
There's a
think
certain amount of humiliation that can be helpful in an exercise.
I'm all about that.
Well, I'll tell you, Lee, for many, many, many years, my belief in exercises is that you always wanted people to feel good at the end. I've really changed my theory about that because I want people to cry when they get out of my exercises for the most part. But you know what that does is it changes behavior.
Yeah.
Because then people get how bad it can be. And you may think you understand how bad it can be, but people are clueless in general.
Yeah. So I was taught, and you've taken it to a different level, and I'm proud of that, is, you want people to have a coat of sweat. You want them sweaty. When I went through my training, and I may have discussed this with you, you really want to get nervous, your heart rate, you get flushed, you get sweaty because it feels so real.
Right.
And then you go through your after action and your debrief. But I love the idea, and I hate to say this publicly, that you make somebody cry. That's a good day. It's a good day. It's a good day. Hello, and welcome to the Fire Chief Podcast, the only podcast dedicated to the Chief Medical Officer. I'm your host, Lee Scheinbart, and this podcast brings you the hottest and most crucial conversations in healthcare and physician leadership today. This week's guest is Regina Phelps, the President and CEO of Emergency Management and Safety Solutions Incorporated, a business built around crisis management. Along with so many other industries, U.S. healthcare is seeing unprecedented levels of crises, and we have found a global expert today to help us understand the role of the physician leader in managing these things. Regina is a widely recognized global leader in crisis management and organizational resiliency, especially for large organizations, and spanning across 5 continents. Since 1982, she has designed over 3,000 exercises, from tabletop, functional to full-scale exercises, to facilitate organizational readiness in times of crisis. Topics include all forms of natural disasters, active shooters, and cybersecurity threats. A nurse by background, Regina developed a 100% woman-owned firm and has spent 43 years honing those skills in this space, along with 4 books to her credit. And over the years, she has worked with clients such as Whole Foods Market, Starbucks, Salesforce, LabCorp, the Bank of Canada, Nike, and Jackson Financial, just to name a few. Regina, welcome to the show.
Lee, it's a great pleasure to be with you on the Fire Chief. I'm excited.
Well, it's been an exciting week, right? I mean, government shutdown, 800 military leader, senseless violence like every other week, and it's only midweek. So this must be like scenario 2648 in your playbook. Have you incorporated political crises amongst your global clientele?
Oh my God, yes. And my global clients in particular, I want to talk about this every day.
So they just are more curious about what we're going through. But in your exercises, you help companies realize what they need to prepare for under a political crisis?
Yes. And in fact, civil war is a very common request for people to talk about. What are we going to do in a case of a civil war, whether it's widespread or whether it's only pocketed in certain areas of the country?
And I'm sorry to invade this, but I'm going to ask this question. These are international companies or based here in the U.S. or both are asking that question?
Both, domestic and international.
Well, that is another topic for another day. I don't think any of our physician leaders are ready to tackle that on day 1. Maybe when we get to day 5, but not day 1.
All right.
All right. So you began your professional life as a bedside nurse, and we talked about this, and you found yourself in hospital education, and then you founded the company. What was part of that pivot from being in that nurse educator role to where you are today?
So actually, it's sort of interesting. I was a bedside nurse only for about a year. I was a director of education at a hospital. And then I was also a director of nursing in a really small rural hospital of 50 beds, but we had a level 3 trauma center. So yes. And my experience of why I am doing what I'm doing now is because one day I got in a really big fight with my boss and I got fired.
Oh, that never happens in the real world.
Never happens. And, I had just finished a thesis for my master's, and I actually was really looking at how I could create a company like this and put it in a healthcare system. Because when I originally started, we did several things. We did emergency response, because that's all there was in 82. There was no crisis management. And then we did safety, and then we did wellness programs. And so we realized right away there's not a lot of interest or money in wellness. Everybody says what they should be doing, but they don't. So we quit doing that after several years. We did safety for probably the first 20. And then in the last 22 years, all I've done is really now what I call crisis management. And I'm sort of one of those odd people that I was in the birthing process of all the work that's now widely available.
So you must either have a gift or some curse to keep you in this space for this long. Which one is it?
I think it's both. This is the nurse part of me that still comes out every daily. I'm always trying to save the world. And so I can't turn it off. And
Yeah.
so that's why we've gotten so deep into the work we do, and we've been really successful at it.
Well, I will honor that, and I respect that, and of course that's why many of us go into healthcare. We're just wired to
Right.
do these kinds of things. So
Right.
most of the listeners are in healthcare. So and you had to educate me. So explain the difference between the generic emergency response that most of us are used to and crisis management, where you were at the beginning of this movement.
Right. So emergency response is something that, of course, hospitals do very, very well. And so when you think about it, it's the immediate organized response to an event. So an ER is a classic example, right? That's an emergency response, right? And so when I look at plans, I don't do any work in healthcare, but when I look at plans that are given to me by a friend saying, would you look at this plan for a hospital? I mean, it's all about emergency response. Really what happens in the first few minutes to the first hours, maybe the first 24 hours of an event, but they never look farther than that. And so when you look at crisis management, it's totally different. It's basically a systematic approach to really prepare to and respond to an event, but that is unexpected, it's disruptive, but it's a holistic approach versus the emergency response. And that's the really big difference. I find there are several groups that don't do crisis management well in general. And that's because of their emergency response background. One of them is healthcare. The second actually really is in the city county government world, because they are, again, the same kind of animal. They do emergency response. And the other are utilities, because they do emergency response. But if it goes on for a sustained period of time, that transition from being emergency to really crisis is really often kind of wonky, to be honest.
Yeah, well, that's very helpful. And I know in my own personal experience, our health system experienced a cyber event that went on for longer than anybody thought it would. And what's unfortunate is that later with Change Healthcare, that the attack on the system, it affected just about every hospital that was involved in one element of the Change Healthcare, which is basically revenue cycle management.
Oh, yeah, I'm very familiar with it.
Okay. So what's fascinating to me to hear you say this is that many systems, even after COVID, which was obviously a prolonged event on multiple levels,
Right.
didn't begin to develop a crisis management like a cyber attack that would close things for a prolonged period of time. Have you been talking with people about this? Why, again, doesn't healthcare, forgetting the mental model that they're stuck in emergency response, we've had enough experience to begin to shift that mindset. Why do you think that's a struggle?
I think the reason it's a struggle is a couple of things. I think it is kind of genetic, right? We're built that way in healthcare. But secondarily, there's not the bandwidth that is required to really build an effective crisis management response. And even though there are now plans in the Joint Commission where you're expected to do continuity plans, they're terrible. I mean, I've looked at a few of my friends and I go like, wow, okay, that sucks. And it's just because I don't think there's the bandwidth to literally do what needs to be done because you're doing so many other firefighting events.
Yeah, but the classic question that I learned is, okay, we can't afford this. We don't have the resources. Can we afford not to do this any longer?
Well, yes, and
yeah,
yes, and this goes back to thinking about healthcare in general. There are just so many pressing demands, and in corporations, the same thing happens when there is a downturn or the markets begin to shift and they get more anxious and they stop thinking forward and they just think about hunkering down and they stop doing a lot of the stuff that has to be done. The only other industry that's required to do any kind of planning and the kind of work that I do is in financial systems. And other than that, it's all because a CEO or a board is really concerned about this work.
Yeah, yeah. And look, to your point earlier, how healthcare workers are wired, maybe just as humans, we're wired in that fight or flight reactionary, reptile brain. When it gets really crazy, we just like, well, how do we react, right? Like, how
Right,
do we
right,
fight this fire
right,
with the firefighter hat on instead of, okay, what happens tomorrow and then the next day and next week and next month?
right.
Totally agree. Um,
Yeah.
would you begin to help us and help our listeners begin to understand sort of what are the four key elements that you shared with me around
Mhm,
healthcare or systems in general, how a
mhm.
leader should respond during a crisis?
Well, so first of all, it's important to sort of look at all the things. There are a bunch of silos within every organization, but in my work, we basically have dropped them into essentially four, if you will. And the first one is emergency response, and that's dealing with all of the urgent life safety related issues. So in the first few moments to probably the first hour or two. Then the next one is all of the technology issues. So both disaster recovery, which is the recovery of your key systems, and then secondarily, you could throw in cyber and all of those other things as well. Then the third thing is really continuity of operations, and that's where you should expect to see true continuity plans. So what do you do to recover your key actions and activities? And then the last is crisis communications. So there are four distinct silos I expect to see everywhere. So emergency response, the issue related to continuity of operations, the issue related to disaster recovery or technology, and then crisis communications. But all of those four things should go up to and be surrounded by crisis management. So I would expect, and that's where you see in a hospital system, a HICS program where you've got using ICS and modified in the hospital manner. And that group should be receiving all of that inbound data in all of those four categories I just mentioned, and they're managing it. That should then, the HICS system in a hospital system, should then go up to the executive team of the hospital or hospital system. And then above all of that should be an enterprise risk, where
Excellent.
you're looking all of that sort of holistically. But so what that means is that those four items that I mentioned are kind of the core, at the beginning, and then everything sort of,
So I'm going to go off script for a second because you're
oh,
implying
go for it.
something and I want to ask this. So should the board of trustees, irrelevant for profit, not for profit, of a hospital or a hospital system, should be involved in enterprise crisis management education so that the board understands what is going on? Look at you, cross-eyed and shaking that head.
Well, it's interesting that you say that because it really has been in the board world, not in healthcare, but in corporations. This was always something that was talked about, but really not much has been done. There's actually an association in the United States called the National Association of Corporate Directors. And that group, which has great education and great programs, they have actually gotten involved in going like, oh, wow, we don't know what our job is. I mean, their job obviously is as a board, but in a crisis, where do they plug in? How do they fit in? And so there's a lot more interest. I don't know if that's happening in the healthcare system, but in the corporate world, it is. I think I had done no corporate board exercises in my life till last year. And I did 5 last year, and I think we've done 10 this year. Because boards are like wondering, like, what about me? Like, what am I supposed to do? And if they don't know, and I'll talk about this with other things that you probably want to talk about, if they don't know what their job is, then they're actually sticking their heads in the wrong places, not being helpful when they could be helpful. And that's no different than a chief medical officer not knowing what the jobs are below them. And so they stick their heads in the wrong places. So boards should be thinking about this. They do have the fiduciary responsibility. And so, yes, if you're looking at sort of the education of the entire chain, they're a big part of that.
Yeah, no, and I would submit in my career experience that boards generally have not been educated and advised. They get a quick onboarding about this,
Right.
but the tradition, and I agree with you, is the board sort of checks out and they'll wait to hear from the CEO. and the CEO or the vice president of strategy, for example, in COVID, oh, no, especially if they're non-clinical. You
Right.
clinical guys handle this and let
You
us
do it.
know
You do
what
it.
you need, and you get your supply chain guy in operations and have at it. And I think you bring up an excellent point, and it's good to hear that some are reaching out to you to do this work.
Mhm.
Baked into that is this notion, and if we need to hit it later in the discussion, about public relations and reputation. So clearly
Mhm.
the board has a responsibility of understanding that, and so does the rest of the management and team. So is that also an element of how leaders need to be thinking about that?
Right. So in the world of crisis management, crisis management is also a term that has been kind of taken, if you will, by different entities, and they use it expecting it to be something different. And one of them is in the area of crisis communications. You'll often see a crisis communication consultant be selling crisis management. They're not really doing that. They're calling it that, but it's really crisis communications. And when you look at the issue of crisis communications, it's super important. And in particular, if you're going to have board chair, probably the chair in particular, but anybody that's at that level, or certainly a CMO, you would want to make sure that they have been media trained and are prepared and ready to be able to respond to media inquiries if they are expected to as part of their job. And often I don't see that. I don't see well-trained people, and then they're stuck in front of a camera, and you know what happens then? It's not pretty. So yeah, I think definitely you want to make sure that you understand what your role is as a CMO or as a board, and if it is appropriate for you to do any sort of on-camera interviews. So a good example where a board might do that, let's say the CEO of a hospital system does something awful and gets fired. Very likely who's going to be a spokesperson at that event is going to be the board chair. Well, it'd be great if they'd actually thought about that and practiced it and had some skills in that area, because it's very different when you're on camera and people are asking you questions than when you're sitting around a board table chatting with your colleagues.
Yeah, and I've seen this play out in real life where, so we'll do an active shooter drill, and I know you've done this hundreds and hundreds of times, but it's all about the active shooter. And then it's like, okay, how did everybody do? And no one from our marketing, PR, media team sat down with the leaders who aren't there at the active
Right.
shooter and saying, now we're going to practice about 5 or 7 times how you're going to talk to the press tonight or tomorrow morning as you
Right.
get this in. And so what we do is people
Right.
default and go, okay, tell me what I'm supposed to read and how I'm supposed to look. And that's not good. And we do it in real time. And so,
Right. No, that's good.
yeah, I
There's a
think
certain amount of humiliation that can be helpful in an exercise.
I'm all
You know,
about that.
well, I'll tell you, Lee, for many, many, many years, my belief in exercises is that you always wanted people to feel good at the end. I've really changed my theory about that. And what really changed that was, and when I started doing cyber exercises, which I guess for us was probably about, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago. And now of all the ones I do, that half of them are cyber related things. And I'll give you an example of this. I did an exercise for a large multinational corporation, actually headquartered in my town, San Francisco. And my client asked me to do a cyber exercise. We performed the exercise, and I was not going to fix it at the end. And my simulators, who was my guy who hired me, I think he just wanted to look good at the end, ended up fixing it. And you could just see the air kind of evaporate out of the balloon. So at the end of the exercise, the CEO, it was just to the CEO and his direct reports. The CEO came up to me at the end and he said, Regina, it was so awful. And then at the end, he said something that changed my life forever. He said, but it wasn't that bad. And I thought, I'm never doing that again, ever. Because I want people to cry when they get out of my exercises for the most part. But you know what that does is it changes behavior.
Yeah.
Because then people get how bad it can be. And you may think you understand how bad it can be, but people are clueless in general.
Yeah. So I was taught, and you've taken it to a different level, and I'm proud of that. Is you want people to have a coat of sweat. You want them sweaty. When I went through
Yep.
my training, and I may have discussed this with you, you really want to get nervous. Your heart rate, you get flushed, you get sweaty because it feels so real.
Right.
And then you go through your after action and your debrief. But I love the idea, and I hate to say this publicly, that you make somebody cry. That's a good day. It's a good day. It's a good day.
I think that should be on my epitaph,
Yeah. Yeah, we
She
did a
made
lot of crying as we were learning as medical students and interns back in the day. They don't allow that much anymore. And maybe we need to bring that back, but I'm going to get a lot of flack for that. Okay, so let's talk about you and I. We have a room of chief medical officers. This is the first time they're hearing about these concepts. They have no training. And you alluded to this earlier. What is the best piece of advice you give them for managing during a crisis? You kind of mentioned teams above and teams below. Expand on that for us.
right. So a CMO or any professional, a senior professional in an organization needs to first of all understand, and I really mean the word understand, what operates above and below them. I think a lot of individuals do not dig deep enough. They don't ask enough questions. It's just one more thing on their list. So I sometimes find, not so much, again, I don't do healthcare, but in my clients who actually really struggle, it's because they haven't either attended any real good training, not just training. Like if somebody says, go to the FEMA website and see the ICS, training, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about somebody that sits down with you, and maybe it's a one-on-one or you're in a small group of executives and you actually hear the entire deep dive of how it all works. Now, you may say it doesn't really matter. It matters, because what happens with executives, and I've seen this in some of my clients, some untrained executive, all of a sudden, like a CEO in particular, there'll be a crisis and they think that they're actually in charge of everything. And that's not true. They should basically understand where their responsibilities lie. And I often find they don't. So the best executives are people that are deeply curious about the process below them, that actually understand and have gone to training, have done observations, have actually got their feet in it, understanding what they do and what other people do. Because when a senior person walks in the room, people start deferring, even if it's not their job, right? I mean, they'll start deferring, and next thing you know, Lee's the guy in charge. Well, Lee shouldn't be in charge, right? So I think it's really important that you're curious, that you take training when it's offered to you. If you don't think you understand it well enough, you get more training, you participate in exercises, and you'll participate at the level that you're supposed to be doing, right? And
Yeah.
so that gets to an important question about, well, what is their job? Well, part of that is, what's their job description? I know it sounds crazy, but what are they supposed to be doing? And so a lot of my clients go like, well, I run everything. Well, no, you don't run everything. You are overseeing it. But what is your job as the senior leader? And so I always tell my clients that are senior leaders, you have only 4 jobs, only 4. So listen up, right?
I'm listening.
The first one is strategic policy. Your job is strategic policy. It is not tactics. It's not determining where the public toilets go. It's none of that. It's strategic policy. So you're going to get
Give me an example, Regina. Sorry to interrupt. Give me
So, for example, from a strategic policy perspective in an organization, they may decide to all of a sudden stop offering a particular service in their company because of what they have experienced. They feel like, oh no, we need to basically take that offering down, and we need to actually go back, and my team is going to fix it and come back. So it's maybe shrinking a market. It might be offering other services. But the idea is policy issues, not tactics. And the reason everybody goes to tactics, it's frankly easier to do tactics.
Right.
So that's why it's I'm a firefighter. I want to go out and I want to put out the fire. I don't need you to put out the fire.
Right.
I got lots of those people. I need you to think about the other things. Maybe you need to then, my second thing on the list is that you might be approving of the expenditures of the teams below you that are above their signing authority. So in a cyber event, often you're replacing tons of servers, for example, very expensive, not in your budget. They can't do that. You're the one that's approving it. So then you have to explain that to your board why that's important. The third thing, and I think is actually in some ways one of the more important of the 4, is that you want to make sure that you are dealing with strategic relationships. You are critical as an executive talking to those senior leaders in other places. So whether that's big insurance carriers, let's say in the case of a healthcare system, or maybe you need to talk to the mayor or the governor, or you need to talk to somebody, a senior person at HHS or whomever, but you have a strategic role. You should expect your team to hand you a list of people to say, I need you to call these 5 legislators. I need to call this, big customer, blah, blah, blah. And then, of course, with the appropriate briefings about what's happened, et cetera. But they're the person, I want dad to talk to another dad, right? Or mom to talk to another mom. I don't want a lower person. It's not going to work. And if my senior person doesn't know that's their job and is not trained up, then they could mess it up, frankly.
Yeah.
And the last one is you may be asked to do an on-camera interview because
Right.
either the situation that it is, and maybe the CMO needs to actually speak up as the medical person.
Right.
But again, that means that you are trained on how to do that.
Yeah. No, great stuff for our listeners. And as part of your educational material, you stressed, and when we talked about this, the importance of constant readiness and contingencies. And back to the issue of a chief medical officer, they may not ultimately or always be charged with these responsibilities in the scheme of who is setting up these contingencies or planning for them. How might they at least contribute relative to how the medical staff functions during a crisis, and specifically patient care and patient safety? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think, again, if they really understand what's happening in the system that they're in, and they understand how the physicians actually integrate into that system and what their responsibilities are, then that person can carry the water, if you will, back to the individuals that are in the medical teams below them. But if they're, to me, they're like a educator in some ways. They should also be really encouraging appropriate training and exercises for those people in those medical groups below them. Because the idea, my most successful clients, I like to say, are the ones where the executives get it. And what I always ask for in my clients is like, okay, who's your executive sponsor? You don't have an executive sponsor? And these are people that are in the crisis management continuity space. If they don't have a sponsor there that's going to, team and cheerlead for them, get them excited, make the executives understand why exercises are important, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, then they're like struggling because it's like talking to the hand. And so a CMO can do so much by being an advocate for this work beyond emergency response. And that requires them to understand it. So having a really good understanding of what their programs are all about, participating in training, going to exercises, and really being a spokesperson and a cheerleader for the work. And if they're not, then that just sort of detracts. And they can then really help influence both the other physicians in the entire organization, but also then the nursing staff and other health professionals.
So let me put this out there and ask for your generic agreement or pushback, however you relate to this, because a lot of us were in the hot seat during COVID, and I have been through multiple hurricane experiences. So I have a little bit more than a younger aspiring brand new chief medical officer who wasn't in the hot seat during COVID. What we learned to do on the fly, and people gave me this information, and I thought it worked very well, and you tell me if this makes sense. I spent a good deal of my time organizing audio interfacing Zoom calls, if you will, with the medical executive committee made up of the medical staff leadership of the hospital. We would have conversations with them, and then we would have conversations with the general medical staff, cascading conversations with regularity during that early phase when we didn't know what the hell we didn't know what we didn't know.
Right.
But we constantly, and then we put out what we'll call the SITREP form, our situation report, very brief, very bulleted, every day in 7 ways, 7 times, so that this is what a CMO can do to prepare for. And if you do an active shooter, for example, or a mass casualty, and you traditionally only use your trauma team and only use your ED, you have to then have the MEC call and the general medical staff call and who's in front of the media call. That's what a chief medical officer should be training. And is that what we're talking about?
Totally.
Okay.
Totally.
All right.
I mean, it's really looking at all of their responsibilities and people that are reporting up to them, underneath them, and then making sure that they are not hearing about this activity for the first time.
Right, right. Which they
And
will, but then you are but that's okay, because then
yeah,
you come in with, this is what we know to be real, if you
right.
will. Yeah, totally agree with that. Okay.
Yeah, and I just think that, again, because, well, healthcare in particular, everybody's way overworked, underpaid. It's crazy, and they don't have enough time. But then what happens is that when the crisis occurs, it's a mess, and it takes a long time to sort of work out of that.
And there's a human capital cost for not
Huge.
preparing, and people then quiet quit, overtly quit, do all kinds of activities because you
Right.
weren't ready. I think you're spot on. So maybe that brings us to the next question. And you had shared with me something called enterprise resiliency. And how might a health system think about enterprise resiliency? What does that mean?
So enterprise resiliency is really looking across all of the components of your entity, of your organization, and determining what is going to make it the most successful in any kind of event. And so many of my clients now, instead of having a risk management department, have an enterprise risk management department. And that looks across the enterprise. And so what you're looking for is, you want to make sure that you've got eyes across everything that could be a problem. And so that they are, again, are appropriately trained everywhere, and that things bubble up at the right time. And so one of the things that, when we design crisis management programs on large corporations, I say to them, every little square inch of your organization needs to know that when the bad thing happens, who they call and when. And so it sounds like a silly little thing, and, oh, that must be done. No, it's not done in most places.
Mm-hmm.
And so I could see in a hospital system where you might have a clinic here or a surgical center here or whatever, and they're kind of trying to manage their activities, but something happens and it's like, well, do I call the corporate office or whatever? And most of them don't do that right away. There needs to be an idea that there is a process in place. If it looks like something like this, I'm going to go to this 800 number or whatever. I'm going to call mom, and then I'm going to report it. And so what we do when we build a crisis management program is we basically figure that out. We map what I do is I map the world of the organization. Many of my clients are all over the world. And so it's like, okay, you have an office of 5 people and it's actually in Mumbai, but really something awful happens. Well, that office needs to know who they call.
Yeah.
And when they call that headquarters or whoever that number is, they need to know exactly what's going to happen. They should not have to worry about who they're going to call, or do I call my boss first or whatever? Because what happens is that that's how things sort of begin to fall apart very quickly. And then the corporate mothership or whoever's getting that phone call needs to have a trained group of people. We call them an assessment team, an initial assessment team. And they basically receive the call, they determine what's going on, and then they make decisions about who needs to get activated and how and why.
Yeah. Yeah.
Most organizations don't do that.
So that was a big problem during Hurricane Katrina.
Oh, yes, exactly.
And I think everybody, I mean, that's a lesson that should be so well learned. I actually have taught one of my modules in our academy about the hurricane, as this is a teachable. I'm not making light of what happened to people, and certainly good people trying to do good things, but it's so teachable because
Oh my
of
God, yeah.
the failures of that. Exactly what you said. Who am I calling and what am I telling them? And then what do they do with that information?
Right.
We have a similar thought pattern on this.
Well, and the idea is that once you report it and you know that those people are doing something, and we all know what that is, then you can then be dealing with what's in front of you. And so it's basically, the call mom, and then there should be a group of people. That's their job. They come together, they make a decision. That doesn't happen in the vast majority of
Right.
companies unless they've
Right.
hired somebody like me to figure it out for them,
It
which is silly.
has to be trained and learned how to deliver effective information exchange in the moment. You can't just
Yep.
suddenly gain that skill in
No.
the moment. I mean, some may be better than others. So on information, Let's get into that sticky wicket, so to speak. There, we are, you and I talked about this. This is a daily pattern of not just misinformation, disinformation
Mm.
from our elected and appointed officials and purposeful malinformation originating from every corner, including citizens, and amplified in ways you and I never heard of when we were little kids. And now, you know, so there's all this communication and information, and maybe as you have explored this, how do you think there might be an approach to this onslaught of malinformation? I know personally, you speak up, you speak out. That's you as an individual. But if we're talking about the healthcare workforce or the healthcare leadership or healthcare systems that are being inundated with malinformation about good medical things, what might your thoughts be on the matter?
It is, boy, aren't we in challenging times as far as that goes. And so I think what's happening, certainly in the area of vaccines and vaccine schedules and recommendations, I think what's happening at the state and local level is probably what's going to carry us through this really difficult time. And I think the if you are in a state as a CMO and you don't have a coalition of groups coming together to create your own recommendations, you've seen that a lot in the West, for example. The whole
Hmm.
Pacific Coast has one. There's several in the East. And the chance that the whole childhood vaccine schedule could be upended is horrifying. I think if you are concerned about this at all and you're in a state that doesn't have a coalition that's already formed, you need to work on that with your medical societies and other physicians, because we're going to have to basically create our own. And I think the good thing is that several other big states have already done that. So if you're a physician and you're wondering like, well, what should we be doing? I think you could easily reach out to those coalitions that are already happening within both in the East Coast and the West Coast. I think that's really important. And it's really sad and embarrassing that our country has come to that. But I think that's absolutely essential at this time
Yeah,
that we're
look,
going to have to do it.
yeah, I mean, maybe I'm too stoic, but like this is where we are today. So we can bitch and moan about like how we got here and who's screwing
Doesn't
around with it.
matter.
Doesn't
Doesn't matter.
matter. Doesn't matter. And I learned during COVID, and everybody who has followed can follow the same principle. Hey, this patient, their family is telling us to administer ivermectin.
Right.
No, we had a committee. We had a discussion. We looked at the literature. We do not administer it. Call your lawyer. We'll be happy to talk lawyer to lawyer. End of discussion. And so to your point,
Exactly right.
exert local control, local experts, subject matter experts that you rely on, and you just push back. So the first thing that happens with the Tylenol autism conversation is the OB that's employed in the system calls the chief medical officer within 5 minutes of that announcement, says, what do I tell the next patient in my
Right.
clinic? Well, shit, you should have been having that conversation last week and
Right.
prepare a statement. We believe that Tylenol, blah, 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 whatever your belief system is. That's not
Yep.
my job to tell you what to believe, but I will tell you what our system does, and you as part of our system will honor, and so on and so forth. So,
Right.
uh, so we're saying the same thing to each other. Yes.
Yeah, oh, totally. And
Okay.
I think, I mean, we can sort of bitch and moan, as they say, about this, but we need to get over it and be prepared and have all of that figured out. And that's why I would say that every physician, every CMO, especially if you're in a larger system, this should be something that you're talking about every day, and you should have this nailed.
Okay, we're going to get to the wrap up part of this. I've got, I think, one or two more thoughts and questions. So, from your personal and professional view, it seems that U.S. healthcare may be stuck in the past, and or is it really teetering on the edge of a collapse? Is the system in crisis, and what are your thoughts relative to leaders in that moment?
Yeah. So again, I'm not in the field any longer, but I certainly observe it from afar. And I do believe that we are teetering on the brink of some major collapse. I mean, let's just look at staffing, for example. All the physicians and the nurses that left during the pandemic, many of them, of course, have not been replaced. For a physician, of course, there's a much longer lead time to get them replaced. But I think we are teetering. And the fact that we have an aging population in the United States who's going to be demanding and needing more services, and yet, indeed, what we're faced with is a shortage of many professionals in many parts of the world. The whole Medicaid crisis that's likely to happen because of the funding issue in the United States, that's going to continue to put pressure on rural hospitals. I was a director of nursing in a 50-bed hospital in Durango, Colorado. I know what that's like. And, you're the last one standing. And when you die, your hospital dies, then what happens to all those people and how many miles they have to travel to get appropriate care, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The maternity deserts that we have in the country because we don't have the appropriate kinds of care. It's a big deal. And I think every day that it still works is a miracle.
If I can interrupt for a second, so
Please.
there's a colleague that we had on this show from Southern California who oversees a health plan for the elderly, and it's throughout the desert Southwest too, and they're very proud of their work, and they should be. And he made a comment recently about leaders in healthcare need to have a wartime mentality right now, and they should be spending the bulk of their energy discussing exactly what you just said. If we're on the brink of a lack of this or a lack of that, money, resources, human capital, whatever you want to do, how do we plan? How do we manage? Instead of waiting for that reaction and it's too late, this goes all the way back to the initial conversation. If we're in a crisis, then you should be putting a portion of your day into crisis management and thinking forward. What's our policy? What's our continuity? What can we bring to bear? What should we be buying or selling to make this work? And I see you nodding for those that aren't on the video. I feel like you're in agreement with those statements.
Oh, yeah, totally. And I think the other thing, too, is that when you think about, as people are getting older and the pressure on the healthcare system is only going to increase as all the boomers start to fill hospitals and physician offices, it's going to be much worse. And so I know we have lots of other problems in the United States, but I think the healthcare system we're just lucky that it's still standing.
Yeah. And that's a testament to the crazy work that people do. And this is
right.
And it's an honor and it's still noble, but it's crazy. And here's the last question, because I want to respect the people that are doing that work day in and day out. Every day it feels like a crisis in healthcare. I know it because I live through it, and I know people because they reach out to me all the time. Do you have any sort of secret mantra or trick? And don't make them cry. So they're literally crying every day. To be totally frank.
Sure they are.
They are.
I'm sure they are.
And they're feeling bone crushed. I mean, any words of wisdom? You've been at this a long time. How do people get through this day in and day out?
Well, what I would say, I'm often consoling and working with emergency managers and continuity professionals. And I always say, the biggest thing that you have to protect is yourself. And this is the issue related to making sure that you do not burn out, because when you burn out, there's nothing left. And so I would say to anybody that's listening to this is that you are your most important asset. You need to make sure that you take care of yourself every day, and what that means for you. I make sure that I spend 5 minutes in the morning and 5 minutes in the afternoon, for example, just close my eyes, do some deep breathing, just chill out. I time myself. It's good because all of a sudden, my whole cardiovascular system shifts and changes and my brain clears. Whether I take a walk in the afternoon, I'm careful about what I eat, and what I drink and all of that. Those things, you're your greatest asset, and you can't do any of this work if you turn into a burned match. And so I would beg and implore all of your listeners that, I know they know all of this, but they need to remember that every day, how important they are and how critical it is that they take care of themselves so they can do more the next day.
And it's beautiful. Let me just say it's beautiful. And that I would encourage every chief medical officer and every chief nursing officer and every chief other officer in healthcare to tell the people and the teams below them how valuable they are.
Amen.
You cannot say it, because I can say it to myself and take a deep breath. But man, when somebody tells me, I appreciated you today, what you did was unbelievable, and you are so valuable. Come talk to me when you need to talk to me. I just think the power of that is infinite in my head.
Totally agree. You need to take care of yourself, and then therefore you can take care of others. And sometimes the best thing you can do is to really give them a good compliment, or send a letter to their file too, or do something of which people are going to know that you really meant it.
Yeah.
That's wrong.
Yeah. Wow. What a show. Ladies and gentlemen, you have been listening to the Fire Chief Podcast, the only podcast dedicated to the Chief Medical Officer. And if you want to learn more about what it is like to be a CMO or how to improve your organization, check us out. We have a website, thefirechiefcmo.com. and connect with me on LinkedIn. I love talking with CMOs from all over. If any of you want to get involved in crisis management exercises, Regina's the person you want to reach out to, and we'll put that in the show notes. So listen, get out there, be a chief, mitigate your next crisis, and in the words of Sergeant Phil Esterhaus, let's be careful out there.